right, it's time to take all of those pieces of the puzzle that I've made, the applique, the embroidery, and the cut work, all together to complete the bag. First steps is I sewed the front of the bag to the back of the bag using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I will continue to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for the whole bag, so don't worry about that. And also, just for the purposes of demonstration, I used a black thread here so that you can see at home, but you'll probably want to use a gray thread. All right, now, this is fine, but we want this to look a little bit more professional, so I'm going to box the corners of the bag. And the way that that works is I'm taking the piece here and opening up the seams. And it's easier to do that if you insert your hand and kind of spread it open. So I spread this seam open and the top seam open, and I've got them on top of each other. And now I'm going to press. And you can add a shot of steam if you need to. Now that that's in position, the measurement is going to be 1.5 inches roughly from the corner to the edge here. The best practice is to measure and mark. And just to be extra safe, we can draw this sewing line. And I'm securing it together with a pin here so it doesn't slip. And I will continue to do the same thing on the other side. To box in the corners that I did at the ironing board, it's necessary to use a straight stitch with the center needle position. Now that we have the bag front and back sewn together and we have the corner boxed, let's repeat with the same thing on the lining, leaving the opening at the top wide. Then sewing 5/8 of an inch seam allowance around the bag, only leaving the bottom open so that there's something that you can turn. Once again, just like we did with the top part of the bag, we are going to box the corners on the lining as well. Before we put the two pieces together, even though everything is complete, just to eliminate some bulk, I'm going to trim these corners. If the raw edge of this bothers you, it's certainly fine to overcast the edge. I'm not going to do that, but you can do this if you want to. The next step is to add the inside pocket to the lining. And first, fold the pocket in half, make a little finger crease, and then that marks the center. So we want to match the centers, the center of the pocket, with the center of a lining piece. To hold the pocket onto the lining, we don't need to take a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We need something slightly less because we don't want to see that extra stitching. So just use the side of the presser foot as your guide, and no back tacking is necessary. The pocket's sewn to the lining, so now the lining gets turned inside out. like this, and it gets inserted into our bag, which stays inside out. So we're going to make sure that the pocket piece goes on to the back piece of the bag. And I'm going to insert this by matching the seams. So we've got the side seams of the lining that match up with the side seams of the bag. Okay, and now using the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, the top of the bag gets sewn. The top of the bag just got sewn, so now it's time to turn it inside out. So now you can see it's starting to look like our bag. This is I always love this part. It's really exciting. You can see there's our hanging pocket. So let's top stitch this folded edge so it stays neat. So how that's going to happen is I've taken stitch number 3 and elongated the stitch length to 3 millimeters long. So now I will be stitching this using the side of the presser foot as a guide. And remember, I'm using black thread so that you can see it, but in general, you're going to want to use the gray thread that matches the bag. So I just completed the top stitching along the top of the bag so that it stays flat, and while I was at the machine, I took the opportunity to use a straight stitch to close the opening at the bottom of the bag. We're almost done, so the next thing to do is to work on the handles. Here is the piece for the handle, and the way that this works is we're going to fold this right sides together and use our 5/8 of an inch seam to sew all the way down the seam, and then we're going to turn the corner. After sewing the handle, it's necessary to turn it inside out, or right side out. I am going to take the material and pinch it so that I can take my large knitting needle. Some people take a pencil with an eraser on the end shoved through, and you're going to slip your knitting needle in on itself. I'm using my chest belly area to push this through, and you're just turning this in on itself. You have to be patient getting it started, but then once you get it going, it's pretty easy to turn. Okay, I've gotten it through to the other side, so I'm going to pinch it, remove the knitting needle, and just use my hands to roll the fabric back on itself so it turns all of the way inside out. And just needs a little bit of straightening up, but we've got a handle. What I like to do is roll this seam open, or lined up, not really open, it's kind of getting it so it's nice and flat. So this would require an iron to press both handles, and then they're top stitched with that triple straight stitch again so that the handle is nice and flat. Once they're to this stage, they're ready to put on the bag. All right, the handle's been made. It's been stitched, turned, and top stitched. All that's left is to fold over each end about a 1/2 inch and then to mark the bag. The bag gets marked in 4 places, 2 places on the front and 2 places on the back. And you want to make sure that they're consistent. So the measurements that I used was 3.5 inches from the side seam. So you take your ruler and you do 3.5 inches. And then it's 1 3/4 inches from the top. So 1 3/4 inches gives us this marking. And you would do the same thing on this side and the same thing on the back. Then for the piece that's folded over for one end of the bag, that gets put in place. And I recommend a pin. You don't have to put too many, but just one to hold it in place. And then it's a personal preference how you want to attach the handle to the bag, but most of the time it's a box with an X in the box, and that's what I'm going to do. And my box is going to be 1.25 inches from the folded edge. And so now that this is pinned in place, I will go to the sewing machine and stitch the box. Then I will go to the corner, double stitch there again, just over top of where it was stitched, and then back again. And repeat 3 more times. Almost done. Just finished sewing on the last of the handle. The next stage is to put a buttonhole right here to hold on the key fob.